I'm here to host Dr. Kristina Lerman, project leader at USC's Information Sciences Institute and research associate professor in the Viterbi School of Engineering. Dr. Lerman's groundbreaking work deciphers social web dynamics on platforms like Twitter and Flickr, uncovering how cognitive biases shape online communities and trends. A true leader in social computing. Today we'll explore how misinformation capitalizes on emotions, not just falsehoods, and how echo chambers foster belonging through shared language. Kristina will challenge us to rethink fact checking and focus on vibe checking, uncovering who benefits, who's harmed, and why certain narratives resonate. I saw you speak at an AI conference at SC. I was compelled to reach out after reading your article on LinkedIn, Why Truth is No Match for Misinformation. Thank you for being here today. I see this conversation as an opportunity to uh, understand what's happening and have good tools going forward, good healthy tools going forward, and really appreciate your insights on this subject. So thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I always welcome opportunities to try to describe, the research that we're doing, the insights we are gaining into social media, such an important force in our lives.
So let's just get into it. Many platforms are implementing fact-checking initiatives and content moderation to curb misinformation. In your opinion, how effective have these efforts been in addressing the root of the problem?
So researchers, academics are studying it actively, and I've been kind of keeping track of this research. And the truth is, it's not terribly effective. People are ignoring, for the most part, they're ignoring any kind of fact-checking messages. They're ignoring hints about fact-checking, any kind of cues about the veracity of the message. People don't seem to care about the truth of the message. Instead, what do people care about? And what people seem to be caring about is actually what is the purpose of this information? Whose interest does it serve? Who is benefiting from it? Lots of work has shown that actually emotional content within messages, within some information, within stories that people are telling online, it's that emotional content that actually grabs people's attention and makes people want to spread the message. For example, outrage, anger, moral violations of moral codes of an ethical code. That's what people seem to be reacting to, whether or not it contains truth or not, misinformation. Even with the news, the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
But in general, just it's been going for a while, but social media has accelerated these trends. So, and the way I'm trying to really understand it from the point of view, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a social psychologist, but I became very fascinated with social psychology, especially because we have introduced these technologies that connect us to other human beings. And yet we don't understand what the impact of those connections is. And in the growing realization in the last 5 years that social media might have had detrimental effects on our society, increasing political polarization, increasing emotional divisions, and some people even blame it, for example, for mental health crisis, especially among the youth, especially in the generation that was one of the first one to grow up with 24/7 access to social media. Starting with that generation who are now Gen Z, things seem to have, their mental well-being seem to have declined. So some people suspect social media is at fault here. So we have all this evidence about detrimental societal effects about social media, and yet we don't fully understand it. So I decided to start paying attention to the emotional content of online interactions in order to better understand it. And that really has really opened my eyes to the potential mechanisms for kind of harm effects. So I'm willing to share how I'm conceptualizing it right now, how I'm thinking about this problem.
Yes, please.
Research is still out, but it kind of helps frame me my research goals and stuff. And
Yes.
that's basically the thinking that, the technology right now is kind of hijacked, evolved mechanisms that humans have developed over millennia, over many, many generations. We developed certain mechanisms that help us survive in the world. For example, one of those mechanisms is kind of negativity bias. So psychologists have. There's one paper that was very influential on me called "Bad is Stronger Than Good," and this evidence we have from psychology that people negative information grabs attention. People pay attention more to negative information. So I'm telling my students, okay, like when you get rejected, rejection hurts. You need to have 7 acceptances of a paper for every rejection to kind of balance the impact negative information like getting paper rejected has versus positive information like getting paper accepted. And Roy Baumeister, who is a psychologist who wrote about it, said, for every, like whether you make negative first impression, you need 7 positive impressions to overcome the negative effects of one, bad first impression.
Hmm.
And in all these other things, like negative information matters more to people because it's like about, negative information about threats that you should watch out because the cost of ignoring a threat is really high, right? Or some hazard in an environment. And social connection also is very important because people actually evolve to pay more attention to negative information, including negative emotions, for example, like anger, some sort of threats. And social media companies realize, just observing human behavior, that people will react more and will share and come back more, and like negative information is stickier. So they're actually promoting it more, like the things that are more like moral outrage, anger, messages that generate anger, that talk about some moral violations and resulting in anger and fear. Social media companies realize that they should actually feature them more highly in their feed, and that gets more attention, gets spread more, and gets people riled out. Messages that trigger emotions, especially negative emotions, get because there's reasons for it, and because of evolutionary reasons for it, and social media just kind of hijacks it. And similarly for social connections, people have evolved the need to be in human groups and around other people. But right now online you can connect to thousands of people. And thousands of people can render judgment about you. They can be hateful towards you, they can attack you, they can bully you. It actually affects human psyche in some ways, that we cannot help ourselves because this is how we were designed to be and interact with others. So all these things have motivated me to start looking at the role of emotions, and my research has been examining it, for example, especially for political communication, like how identity or partisan identity affects how you interact with others. And we are measuring very strong effects. When people talk online, mostly we use Twitter platform, when people talk online to other people who share their partisanship with their ideology, they express more positive emotions like joy, for example. And when they talk to their outgroup, people with the opposite identity, they express more anger, they express more disgust, they express more toxicity. And they also actually share smaller messages with them, shorter messages in their replies than when they talk with people within their in-group. So all these emotions are being expressed at a microscopic scale in individual pairwise communications, and yet we are showing in our research that it affects the global structure, how social networks on Twitter are organized. So that's just a little brief overview of what we are finding.
Do you also take into consideration the commerce behind all this? Because, we as a people want to be in a tribe and be accepted, and but the people that bring us those tools are ultimately profiting and will
Mm-hmm.
that's their priority, right?
You know what? This is such an important point, and the way I like to say, it's grift. It's all grift drives a lot of the online interactions. You know what? But yet I haven't yet studied it, but I suspect it is a big player in not only even right now. For example, we're looking at actually diet and fitness communities and how
Mm.
they might spread some harmful and unsafe behaviors that result in eating disorders like anorexia or muscle dysmorphia like fitness. There's a lot, and they're actually on Twitter. Actually, it's the effects on Reddit, Twitter. We are looking at it. Looks like it's the effect of communities. People join their groups and communities, and they can get radicalized into this harmful mindsets. like pathological mindsets. But on TikTok, for example, it looks like it's the influence of influencers, like few accounts with many followers that they can promote it. And so oftentimes these accounts end up selling products like
Yes.
supplements, vitamins, whether protein powder or some sort of muscle building supplements. And then TikTok gets benefit, right, by featuring them more highly, and then they get financial reward. Kind of, both kind of they helped TikTok and TikTok helps them. Like studying political misinformation, you can offend people. People like, what is misinformation? There's lots of, depends on your point of view, right? Lots of
Right.
ambiguity. But in health space, there's definitely misinformation that can be very easily defined. It's like, unsafe practices. If you're telling somebody you should be using steroids and here's how steroids will benefit you, that's definitely problematic, because steroids actually lead to all kinds of health issues for young men, especially, So, people are promoting supplements, that if you overindulge supplements and that hurts your kidneys, and they're not disclosing often, actually never actually disclose potential bad effects. That's health misinformation. So there's a lot less kind of, feelings. A lot less controversial to talk about misinformation in the health space, and everything is misinformation, or anything like is tied into the personal goals. Again, who is benefiting? You don't have truth checkers, right? Fact checkers on that misinformation, but there should be like disclosures that conflicts of interest disclosures, which is not in the benefit interest of social media companies to provide, and yet it's actually ending up hurting their audience, their clients, their consumers of this content. 10 years ago, I was looking at cognitive effects, and it basically started because people used to explain how information spreads on Twitter, for example, on Reddit, on all these social networks. People use this metaphor of information contagion, that something like a piece of information is like a virus, it infects people and then they infect others and it spreads. But if that is true, then you'd expect like sizable, you expect pandemics to happen on a regular basis, information pandemics to happen.
Yeah.
But then when we started back in 2005, 2006, we started collecting data systematically for social media and measuring the size of these information cascades. How far does this given message spread? How many people receive it? And in reality, like 99.99% of messages don't go further than maybe one person retweets it. No, don't go, most of them die out. And then we start like, oh, it's interesting. Why don't information why don't epidemic models work for social media? And then after digging in more, we realized it was because of this finite human brain's finite capacity to process information. People who are influencers, for example, who are in these positions to spread many far and wide, they also follow many others. And which means their feeds are very, very long. So the chance that they'll see any specific thing within their very, very long feed is minuscule, infinitesimal. So they actually act as these influencers who also follow. Not only do they have many followers, but they also usually follow many people as well. So they act as fire breaks to the spread of information.
Yeah.
And things that they are. But that's also true for anybody like the gold rush. If you want to become an influencer, getting attention of other people is really hard because everybody else is fighting for that attention.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are willing to incur significant costs in order to but have their, to promote their tribe, to get their tribe to it. They're willing to take financial risks, for example, just to stick it to somebody else, right? So yes, punishing enemies and rewarding your own friends are the huge motivators because of the emotional aspects of that, yes.
You argue that misinformation derives its power from emotional resonance than factual content. Can you elaborate on that dynamic a little bit, understanding the false narrative?
I would like to give a little background on me, which actually fits into this. So
Yes, of
actually,
course.
I was born and raised in Kiev,
Uh-huh.
Ukraine, which actually until about 2019, people ask me where I'm from. I say I'm from Russia because nobody heard of Ukraine. Now everybody knows about Ukraine, what it is. And so let me give you this example. Or like I grew up. World War II was a big deal. Still, it was a huge trauma. Like over 20 million Soviet citizens died during World War II. So Nazis were like very strong, potent force. It scarred. There was generational traumas in contemporary psychology language.
Yes.
But everybody suffered from this, like Ukrainians and Russians as well. So when the war started, actually, you can see it actually we have data from Telegram. This is, we have collected messages from 1,000 Russian war bloggers and also Ukrainian war bloggers. So we have about 10 million messages from about almost 1 million channels talking about the war. And you can actually see how once the invasion, the Russians invaded Ukraine, suddenly this Nazi narrative started. Russians started saying, oh, there are Nazis in Ukraine. There are Nazis in Ukraine. And of course, that triggers all kinds of feelings on the part of Russian, and then goes even, in fact, the model we created to quantify it, we call it the dark language model. It's actually related to the language of othering processes, but it was just so dark and said, oh, these people, we discovered after Ukrainians left, we went in and we discovered bodies in the basements, and they had swastikas carved into their dead bodies. It's like shocking language, right? When
Yes.
you use it. Why? Why are they using? They're using it, to justify invasion of Ukraine because they know it will scare people. Is it misinformation? Yes, it is misinformation. But it is information that's based on a kernel of truth. Yes, in the 1930s, there were collaborationists that collaborated with Nazis, Ukrainian nationalists who collaborated with Nazis. It was a small faction. It was that every other country had as well. French had collaborationists. Belgians had collaborations. There are many countries that had collaborations who decided to.
Yes.
That's right. So yes, it's true that there is that kind of ultra-nationalist faction that was collaborationist, but it is not. They're just a small minority of the people. So whether or not it's misinformation, you have to decide. There is a kernel of truth, I will agree, but Russians still blew up that kernel of truth, blew up saying, oh, this Ukrainians want to wipe out Russians, destroy Russian language, destroy it. And that actually, that kind of driving up this fear, and they use fear-mongering language to whip up the population and also enable their soldiers to do massacres, to commit atrocities in the place where I grew up. I spent the first 3 years of my life in Bucha. It's a suburb of Ukraine. And Bucha became famous because after Russians retreated, they found basically how Russian soldiers basically committed atrocities there. But so we are looking at this language that people are using online, and we can see whenever there's news comes about Western aid to Ukraine, like Russians, the narratives are whipped up saying, oh, like Russophobia, the West wants to destroy us, so trying to use any kind of events, trying to scare the population and also demonize. They also use the language of fear-mongering was also directed against the Ukrainians. The Nazi narratives were also very strong. And also dehumanizing language, which actually wasn't as strong as we expected it to be, but definitely fear. Actually, that's what one thing we learned from this research is how strong fear is. Fear-mongering is a very strong motivator and strong divider.
Right, and it works.
Exactly. I mean, I remember we started on this area of research because I forget the name of there was somebody came to USC. He was a Yaroslav, I forget his last name, but he was a reporter for Wall Street Journal, and he wrote a book about Russia-Ukraine war. So I came up to him and said, I don't understand. How could, I grew up among Russians and Ukrainians. Everybody was considered equal. How could Russians have committed those atrocities against Ukrainians in Bucha? And he said, oh, well, they just succeeded in othering Ukrainians. And that could have happened so quickly. And he said, yes, it happened basically very quickly. And I wanted to test his hypothesis by looking at the data. And indeed, we saw what he was predicted, the kind of othering language, which has two components, actually, that has both fear-mongering and hate speech. We saw both of those at work in the Russian sphere. Not that much. It was worked very differently with, in the Ukrainian blogosphere. So I do think this kind of misinformation, the power, whatever, misinformation is used as a vehicle in propaganda to promote some ideas. But those underlying things, propaganda is underlying actually using emotions actually to make people believe certain things, believe misinformation or believe what information is trying, what you're trying to tell. It's all basically, we shouldn't be saying misinformation, we'd be saying propaganda.
And we're seeing this in real time right now too, right? Because I mean, we're talking, there's been comments about, immigrants eating cats and
Mm-hmm.
dogs at the border and things like that. Uh, and that's clearly just not factual, but the people in that tribe are not coming forward to raise their hand and say that's not factual. And so at some
Yeah,
level, there's some acceptance, even if they don't think it's true, that it was said.
exactly. It's like and they would even claim, I've heard people who are proponents say it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's a good story, right? That's what. That's right. So that's right. It's a good story. The story they want to promote is like to dehumanize, denigrate a group of people, and the story serves those ends. You know.
Yeah. And this is a big part of why I wanted to speak to somebody like you who has a better perspective on this than most people do, is what do we do about this? You know what I mean? Because at some point it's almost like a wildfire that we can't control. Is it a matter of it's just going to swing so bad and then just swing back, or are we really in a dangerous situation? It's hard to really know where we are as this evolves so quickly.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I don't have solutions either. But I'm also speculating, how far will this go? Is there going to be some mechanism to snap back or not? I mean, to a certain extent, everything in society is a pendulum. It swings one way, then people get tired with swings another way. So that could be a solution. But maybe we can't afford to have solutions.
Right.
If indeed, for example, social media mental health is causing mental health crisis among, I mean, the jury is still out, but if there is some link to it, when is it going to stop? Is it going to stop when 100%, like right now, like something like 60% of young women and girls are, for example, depressed and anxious? Is it going to stop when 100% of them are? Maybe because, unity and common ground is not important to us right now. And until it becomes important to us as a society, we're not going to have the tools or the willingness to fight it. So
Yeah.
hopefully it is a pendulum and it will swing back when division will no longer be valued and unity will be valued.
You made this observation, you might have a group that's like, here's something, and then steps forward in the circle, and it's like, yeah, but that's not true, and there's no value in making that statement, or even if it is true. Uh, expand on this concept of vibe checking, and how is that valuable?
So in general, I think actually maybe it's also naive of me to think about it, but something like disclosures, how you have like fact checking is a type of disclosure, but there's other more disclosures are needed. Like saying, for example, when there were political ads, and then about 20 years ago they required the disclosure. Who is sponsoring this political ad, right? Because then it makes sense in the bigger scheme of it. It's like, oh, this thing is being said, but it matters who is saying it, right? So that's why political disclosures became popular or required as mandatory in ads. So I'm thinking kind of similar things, not just like, oh, this is true, this is not true, saying who is promoting this idea, who is it benefiting, who is getting hurt by this idea. And I think actually if you maybe reveal the people, actual groups or actual individuals who are getting harmed or actual individuals who are benefiting from it, maybe that has a chance of like changing the rhetoric, changing this propaganda. That's what at least that we have some evidence from the political ads that helps. So
Hmm.
that's why I'm like maybe we should try it for this. For example, Haitians eating pets, can say in addition to saying like, oh, there's no evidence for this, saying like, oh, this is actually demonizing, dehumanizing a group of people who, who came to this country to seek, stability because their country is Haiti is a failed country right now. It's like not safe for anybody,
Right.
right? So they were granted this special protected status because of this, and they could, contribute. So if there was something like to realize that this is not abstract things, that there are some people who are getting hurt by this rhetoric, maybe that would change the conversation a bit. But I've also been hearing there's some other research in psychology that talks about the positive things, like the power of awe to move us, they're being amazed at things. So I think actually if we put our mind to it and amplify the positive aspects, we probably need new social media platforms to do that. But we can actually use social media and human contact technologically for connectivity to promote good as well.
I'm with you on that. I'm ultimately optimistic. So let's talk about the echo chamber for a bit. It's often said that echo chambers isolate people from diverse viewpoints. You suggested that their power lies elsewhere in creating shared emotional experiences. How does this shape how misinformation gets out?
Uh, echo chamber, echo chambers kind of has a bad rap right now, and I'm trying to counteract it. In fact, you know, we being politically liberals, for example, I was hanging out in my echo chamber, which actually kind of saved my sanity, during election
Yes.
season,
Yes.
um, so there's actually two answers to this actually. So first, well, it can be used for power of good, but also if you surround yourself within an echo chamber with other people who have pathological mindsets, you will get a pathological mindset as well. That's what we are finding on Twitter, this self-organizing communities like that come together. Um, for example, in eating disorder space, once you kind of get sucked into this community, it will reinforce your sense of belonging to for anorexia community, and then you will start adapting many of their beliefs and start talking like somebody, promoting pro anorexia type behaviors. So there can be like negative things as well. But from political point of view, and we actually studying this, constructing mathematical models of what people believe and what they believe depends on what their friends believe. So if you construct, so this mathematical model, I'll describe it to you very briefly, but it has very surprising predictions which seem to actually explain what is going on in the real world. So to study kind of the power of echo chambers or communities to shape your beliefs and polarization, like we have the simple model and we can study it mathematically. Simple model says, oh, people look at their like around themselves, like and see who their friends are, people in their in group, and they try to align their beliefs with their in group,
Hmm.
with some force that's proportional to in group love. It's this in group favoritism, like forces you to align your beliefs with in group. But they also look at their out group, people in the opposite political party, for example, people who believe different. So they look at out group and they try to distance themselves from the beliefs of the out group with parameters proportional to in group out group antagonism or out group hate. So you can think of this as, for example, masking, right? If you're became very like if you despise your out group and your out group says masking works, then you're going to distance yourself and say, oh no, masks don't work, right? So you have this. So this is a very, very simple model. Kind of you align to the beliefs of your in group and you try to separate from the beliefs of your out group, and then we can actually mathematically model and see what happens. And interestingly, depending on the strength of in group love and out group hate, you can actually get very different behaviors. Either you can have consensus where everybody, in their echo chamber across the echo chambers believes the same thing. For example, they believe masking works. Everybody will believe it. Or you get party line polarization when one group believes one thing and another group believes something else. But with echo chambers, what we are finding, a mathematical model predicts that if you start adding links between echo chambers,
Hmm.
It will actually destabilize. You can have consensus, and then you start linking people, showing them what the other group thinks, and suddenly consensus will break down into this polarization. In fact, like the groupiness of echo chambers, they kind of in, they amplify in-group love, so they actually help you kind of acquire, and they decrease the out-group hate. So, and indeed, there have actually been studies done before. People thought, oh, to reduce polarization, we just have to show liberals conservative things and vice versa, right? And there was a field experiment that was done, and they found actually there was a backlash. Surprise, it backfires basically. When you start showing liberals more conservatives tweets, liberals get more entrenched in their polarized beliefs. Not
Wow. Yeah.
And this simple model we said that explains that because of the emotional reactions, people get triggered when they see what the other side believes, it triggers them to kind of be contrarian and believe something else. So echo chambers, very, very complex, and they don't necessarily always promote polarization. But what they do is actually radicalize people, make their identity stronger by isolating them from alternative viewpoints, kind of makes them strengthen their. So that's why, because of those effects, for example, that's why in some mental health type conditions, falling into an echo chamber can be a bad thing because it will strengthen your pathological beliefs. Or extremism, for example, the radicalization. Like if you fall into this like a group of people, an echo chamber that has some radical ideology, it will strengthen your own identity and belonging to that radical ideology. We contain multitudes, right? Each of us has many fine, I'm a woman, I'm also a scientist, and I'm also Jewish, and I'm also Ukrainian, and all of these things are part of me at the various points, and maybe one part of aspect of my identity might be threatened, which will amplify, make some ideas more salient than others.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and you can actually see it in the realignments you see on a global basis, how people get aligned and sense of identity, and maybe some, for example, we are studying right now when Roe v. Wade was overturned during the Dobbs decision. Suddenly, women, Republican women, maybe their aspect of their female aspect of their identity became more salient because it was threatened.
Mm-hmm.
Did it actually change their ideological, lead to ideological realignment?
Yeah.
So there's many examples like that. So we do have identity, but our identity is very multi-granular, right? To many different sides, and at different sides, one aspect of our identity might be strengthened versus another aspect. So there's societal level reconfigurations and realignments that might happen. So, which we are actually taking a look right now.
Social media is frequently accused of unraveling the fabric of society. Do you think this critique is fair? And how might platforms, if they were interested in navigating this better, how might they uh, adjust more effectively? Can we completely blame them, or is it more of a reflection of who we actually are?
No, we can blame them and everything. Okay, here, this is actually harkens back to answer this question. I'll say what I initially started talking about: how social media or technology in general kind of hijacks our evolved social mechanisms, right? Let me give you an analogy, so human beings, with an analogy with junk food, right? Human beings have evolved because we didn't have access to food all the time, so we evolved to have preference for nutritionally dense, high fat, high um, nutritionally dense foods, right? We natural gravitate. We like them. It's evolved. We have a liking for those foods, right?
Yes.
So this liking is what junk food companies actually exploit this
Yes.
preferences to sell us junk food. But it's nutritionally, it's very dense, it's appealing to us, palatable, but it doesn't offer that much nutrition that we need for sustenance, right? And as a
Right.
result, people become more unhealthy, right? So social media is something like this, feeding us social junk food for our social interactions. It's like replacing, giving us this feeling, like makes us want to reach out to others online, makes us feel like we are satisfying some craving, but it's not actually doesn't fulfill our emotional needs, and
Yes.
in fact makes us emotionally unhealthy. So that's how I'm thinking through this metaphor of junk food. I'm thinking of social media as like junk food,
Yeah.
social junk food.
Where can people follow you on social? Are you have any social platforms, ironically, that I'm asking you about now? Or
you know, but now it seems like a lot of my tribe has migrated to Blue Sky. So I'm Kristina Lerman on Blue Sky
and of course on LinkedIn.
and LinkedIn as well. That's right.
Yes, yes. Dr. Lerman, thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I will put all those the links and some of the mentions in this conversation in the show notes for people to check out if they want to dive in. Her article is definitely worth a read if you catch that on LinkedIn as well. So super grateful and thank you very much.
Thank you. It was really my pleasure. My pleasure. It was fun to talk with you. Thanks for the good questions.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.